The silence in the sprawling penthouse was the first thing that struck him. Not the peaceful quiet of early morning, but a cold, hollow emptiness that clung to the air. Nathaniel Sterling called her name, Ava, but only the echo answered. On the perfectly made bed, where his pregnant wife should have been sleeping, lay a single white envelope. Her name wasn't on it. His was. Inside the letter didn't scream or accuse. It was worse. It was calm, precise, and utterly devastating. It spoke of a truth he could no longer hide, and a future he had just lost. Ava was gone, and he was about to learn that her disappearance was not an act of weakness, but the first move in a war he never saw coming. The Sterling penthouse was a testament to a life lived above the clouds both literally and figuratively. Perched 50 stories above the glittering expanse of downtown Chicago, its floor-to-ceiling windows framed a city that seemed to worship at its feet. For Ava Sterling, it was a beautiful cage, exquisitely decorated with modern art, Italian furniture, and the suffocating weight of loneliness. At 7 months pregnant, Ava moved through the opulent space with a gentle grace that belied the subtle anxiety in her eyes. She would often stand by the vast windows, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, and watch the tiny anonymous people bustling below. They all seemed to be heading somewhere with purpose. She, on the other hand, was simply waiting for her husband, Nathaniel, to come home, waiting for their baby, a little girl she had already named Lily, to arrive, waiting for the life she had been promised to finally feel real. Nathaniel Sterling was a man forged in the crucible of ambition and old money. He was devastatingly handsome, with a charm that could disarm board members and a ruthlessness that had doubled his family's fortune. When he married Ava, a warm-hearted art curator with a kind smile and a genuine soul, the society pages called it a fairy tale. He was the prince, and she was the beautiful gentlewoman who had captured his heart. But fairy tales, Ava was learning, were often best read from a distance. The man she had fallen in love with, the one who quoted poetry during their first date at the Art Institute, the one who held her hand through a thunderstorm because he knew she was afraid was becoming a ghost. He was present in body, but absent in spirit, his mind perpetually elsewhere. His phone was a permanent extension of his hand, buzzing with texts he would angle away from her and calls he would take in his study, with the door firmly closed. "It's the merger, darling," he would say, his voice a smooth balm, meant to soothe any suspicion. "It's a monster. Just a few more weeks of this, I promise. Then it's just you, me, and our little Lily." Ava wanted to believe him. She clung to those words, repeating them to herself like a mantra. She filled her days with prenatal yoga, designing the nursery in soft shades of lavender and cream, and reading parenting books until the words blurred. She was building a nest, feathering it with all the love and hope she possessed, praying it would be enough to entice the man she married to finally land. Her best friend, Jessica Thorne, a sharp-witted attorney who saw the world in facts and evidence, was less convinced. A merger doesn't require whispering into a phone at 2 a.m. "Ava," Jessica had said over lunch the week before, her gaze pointed. "And it certainly doesn't require buying new cologne that smells suspiciously like something a 20-something would wear." "He's under a lot of stress," Ava defended, though her voice lacked conviction. "He's doing this for us, for our family." Jessica had simply sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Just be careful. A man who builds an empire is used to acquisitions. Make sure you're not one of them." The words had stung, because they echoed a tiny, terrified voice in her own heart. She pushed the doubt away, blaming it on hormones, on the anxieties of a first-time mother. Nathaniel still had his moments of tenderness. He would return late, exhausted from his meetings, and place a hand on her belly, a flicker of wonder in his eyes as he felt their daughter kick. "My two girls," he'd murmur, his voice thick with what she desperately hoped was genuine emotion. In those moments, the cage felt like a sanctuary again. Tonight was their 3rd anniversary. Nathaniel had called that afternoon, his voice slick with apology. "Ava, my love, I am so sorry. The final negotiations just went into overdrive. I can't get away. I feel terrible." Disappointment, sharp and familiar, pierced her heart. "Oh, I was making your favorite, the ossobuco. Save it for me, darling. I'll be home as soon as I can break free. I'll make it up to you, I swear. We'll have a proper celebration this weekend, just the two of us." He sounded so sincere, so regretful. "Okay, Nate," she whispered. "Be safe." After hanging up, she stood in the silent kitchen, the rich aroma of the slowly braising veal filling the air. It was a meal meant for two, a celebration of their love. Now it was just a sad reminder of another broken promise. But as she leaned against the cool marble countertop, a spark of defiance ignited within her. She was tired of waiting. She was tired of being the passive, understanding wife. She remembered him mentioning the name of the restaurant where the negotiations were being held, Vivere, a sleek, exclusive Italian place downtown. A plan bold and uncharacteristic formed in her mind. She would pack up a slice of the anniversary dinner she'd made. She'd go to him. She wouldn't interrupt. Of course, just give the package to the maitre d' to pass along. It would be a small, romantic gesture. A way to feel connected to his world, to show him she was thinking of him, to remind him of the home he had waiting for him. With a renewed sense of purpose, she changed into a simple but elegant maternity dress, her hands trembling slightly as she applied a touch of makeup. She felt a powerful kick from within, as if Lily were cheering her on. "It's okay, little one," she whispered to her belly. "Mummy's just going to go see Daddy." She carefully packed a container with the tender ossobuco and a side of saffron risotto, a handwritten note tucked inside. "Couldn't let our anniversary pass without you tasting this. I love you. A." As the elevator descended, carrying her down from their isolated world in the sky, she felt a flutter of nervous excitement. She was breaking out of her cage, even if just for an hour. She was taking control. The city lights blurred past the windows of the cab, each one a tiny star in a galaxy she was finally rejoining. She had no idea she was racing toward a collision that would shatter that galaxy into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. The entrance to Vivere was discreet, marked only by a polished brass plaque and a heavy mahogany door. It was the kind of place that thrived on exclusivity, where fortunes were discussed over plates of truffle pasta and secrets were whispered over glasses of vintage Barolo. As Ava stepped out of the cab, the cool night air did little to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She clutched the small insulated bag containing her peace offering, feeling a sudden wave of self-consciousness. Was this a foolish, desperate idea? She pushed the thought aside. This was a romantic gesture, not a pathetic one. She was a wife trying to connect with her overworked husband on their anniversary. There was no shame in that. The restaurant's interior was a symphony of dark wood, soft leather, and muted golden light. A wave of warmth and the low hum of conversation washed over her. The maitre d', a tall, impeccably dressed man with a practiced air of polite indifference, approached her. "Good evening, madame. Do you have a reservation?" "Oh no, I'm not staying," Ava said quickly, offering him a warm smile. "I'm here to drop something off for my husband, Nathaniel Sterling. He's in a business meeting here." The maitre d's expression flickered for a fraction of a second, a subtle shift from professional courtesy to something guarded. "Miss Sterling, you say?" "Yes, he's with the merger group." Ava's voice faltered slightly. She didn't even know the name of the company he was supposedly merging with. The realization sent a chill down her spine. "Of course. One moment." He glanced at a screen on his podium, his brow furrowing slightly. "Mr. Sterling is seated in one of our more private booths, toward the back." "Could you possibly just give this to him for me?" she asked, holding up the bag. "It's a surprise for our anniversary." The man's eyes softened with what looked like genuine pity. It was a look that set every nerve in Ava's body on high alert. Perhaps it would be better if you gave it to him yourself, madam. This way." He gestured down a short, carpeted hallway away from the main dining room. A sense of dread, cold and heavy, began to pool in Ava's stomach. Why wouldn't he just take the bag? Why was he looking at her, like she was a lamb being led to slaughter? Her feet felt like lead as she followed him. He stopped short of a secluded alcove where a single booth was tucked away, offering its occupants an intimate view of the city skyline. He nodded toward the booth, and then with a quiet "excuse me," he retreated, leaving her standing alone in the hallway. From her vantage point, she could only see the back of Nathaniel's head. He was leaning forward, his posture animated and engaged in a way she hadn't seen in months. Across from him, a woman's hand adorned with a delicate diamond bracelet rested on the table. A cascade of platinum blonde hair caught the light. Ava's breath hitched. She took one hesitant step forward, peering around the partition. And then she saw her. The woman was Bianca Dubois, a supermodel whose face graced the covers of magazines that lay unread on their coffee table. She was impossibly beautiful, her features sharp and angelic. Her body poured into a shimmering silver dress that left little to the imagination. But it wasn't her beauty that made Ava's world tilt on its axis. It was the way she was looking at Nathaniel, a look of sultry, possessive intimacy. And it was the way Nathaniel was looking back at her. He was smiling. Not the tired, distracted smile he gave Ava, but a full, unguarded smile of pure delight. He reached across the table, his hand covering Bianca's. Their fingers intertwined. He leaned in and whispered something that made Bianca laugh, a tinkling sound that grated on Ava's ears like shattering glass. This wasn't a business meeting. This was a date. The air rushed from Ava's lungs. The small bag in her hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The anniversary dinner, the symbol of her love and effort, was now a pathetic joke. Every late night, every whispered phone call, every monster merger fell into place, forming a hideous mosaic of deceit. Jessica's warnings, her own suppressed doubts, they all came roaring to the surface. A wave of nausea and dizzying pain washed over her. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. The movement caught Nathaniel's eye. His head whipped around. His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, which quickly morphed into cold fury. His eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at her with adoration, now blazed with the anger of a man who had been caught. He disentangled his hand from Bianca's and stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Bianca looked over her perfectly sculpted face, registering a flicker of annoyance, before settling into a smirk of triumphant contempt as she took in the sight of Ava, pregnant, heartbroken, and utterly out of place. "Ava!" Nathaniel hissed, striding toward her. He grabbed her arm, his grip painfully tight, and pulled her further down the hallway, away from the prying eyes of the other diners. "What in God's name are you doing here?" His voice was a low, venomous whisper. There was no concern, no remorse, only rage at being discovered. "It's our anniversary," she choked out the words, tasting like ash. The bag slipped from her fingers, hitting the plush carpet with a dull thud. "Our anniversary. You think it's appropriate to follow me, to spy on me?" He seethed, his face inches from hers. "You've embarrassed me. You've embarrassed yourself." Tears streamed down Ava's face, hot and blurring her vision. "You're here with her, on our anniversary." "This is a business dinner." He lied, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "Bianca is the new face of Sterling Industries' lifestyle brand. This is work." Ava stared at him, at the man she had promised to love for eternity. She saw not a husband, but a stranger. A cruel, calculating stranger who was insulting her intelligence while her heart was breaking. From the alcove, Bianca's voice drifted toward them, laced with bored amusement. "Nate, darling, is there a problem? Your guest looks unwell." The dismissive way she said guest was the final brutal blow. Ava was not his wife, not the mother of his child. She was an inconvenience, an interruption. Ava looked from Nathaniel's furious face to the smirking model, and then back. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a chilling clarity. The cage wasn't just lonely. It was a lie. The man she loved didn't exist. He was a character Nathaniel had played to acquire her, and now the performance was over. Without another word, she wrenched her arm from his grasp. She turned her back on him, on the life they had built, and walked away. She didn't run. She walked with a strange, newfound calm, her posture erect. Each step was a deliberate severing of a tie. She could feel his eyes burning into her back, but he didn't call out to her. He didn't follow. She walked past the pitying maitre d', through the heavy mahogany door, and out into the indifferent city night. The cold air hit her face, but she barely felt it. She was already numb. The fairy tale was over. The shattered pieces of her reality lay scattered on a restaurant floor, and all she could do was walk away from the wreckage. The taxi ride back to the penthouse was a silent, surreal blur. The city lights, once symbols of life and energy, now seemed to mock her, flashing past the window like a series of cruel, glittering sneers. Ava sat perfectly still in the back seat, one hand resting on her belly, not out of tenderness, but as if to shield her unborn daughter from the toxic truth that had just poisoned their world. The baby was the only real thing left. She paid the driver in a daze and rode the private elevator up 50 floors, the ascent feeling like a descent into hell. When the doors opened directly into their apartment, the opulence that had once felt comforting now seemed grotesque. It was a stage set for a play about a happy marriage, and she had just discovered the lead actor was a fraud. The scent of the osso buco she had lovingly prepared still hung in the air, a cloying reminder of her naivety. She walked into the kitchen, her movements stiff and robotic, and dumped the entire pot of food into the garbage disposal. She watched, transfixed, as the rich, dark meat and vegetables were pulverized into an unrecognizable slurry. It felt symbolic. For hours she wandered the vast apartment like a ghost, She touched the cold marble of the countertops, the soft cashmere of the throws, the rigid spines of the books on the shelves. These were the props of her life, and they felt utterly alien to her. She drifted into the nursery, a sanctuary of lavender and cream that was now tainted. The tiny dresses hanging in the closet, the small rocking horse in the corner, the mural of gentle stars on the ceiling. They were all for a child who would now be born into a broken home. A sob, raw and ragged, finally escaped her lips, breaking the suffocating silence. She sank to the floor, leaning against the crib, and wept. She cried for the man she thought she had married, for the love she thought they shared, for the future that had been stolen from her. She cried until she was empty, until there were no tears left, only a cold, hard clarity settling deep in her bones. Nathaniel's betrayal wasn't just an affair. It was a fundamental disrespect for her, for their marriage, for their child. His rage at being caught was more telling than any apology could have been. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was furious that she had seen him for who he truly was. She couldn't raise a child in this environment of lies and contempt. She couldn't let her daughter grow up thinking that this was what love looked like. A new emotion began to bloom in the desolate landscape of her heart. Not anger, but resolve. A steely, unshakable resolve. She would not be a victim. She would not be the poor, pregnant wife whispered about in society columns. She would not stay and fight a man who had no honor. She would disappear. The plan formed with a startling swiftness and precision she didn't know she possessed. It was as if the shock had burned away all her indecision, leaving only a core of pure protective instinct. She went to her private study, a small room Nathaniel had always dismissed as her hobby space. She opened a locked drawer in her desk, revealing a bank book for an account he didn't know existed. It was an inheritance from her grandmother, a fiercely independent woman who had once told her, "Always have your own garden, my dear, a place no one else can touch." Ava had kept the account, depositing small amounts from her freelance art consulting work over the years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. It was her garden. She packed one small, nondescript suitcase, not with designer clothes from her current life, but with practical things, comfortable shoes, simple dresses, the worn copy of Pride and Prejudice her mother had given her. She took only one framed photo, a sonogram picture of Lily. She packed her prenatal vitamins and a small folder containing her essential documents. Everything else, the couture gowns, the glittering jewelry, the empty trappings of being Mrs. Sterling, she left behind. They were parts of a costume she would never wear again. Finally, she sat at the grand mahogany desk in Nathaniel's study. She took out a single sheet of his heavy, monogrammed stationery. Her hand did not shake as she wrote. She poured none of her heartbreak onto the page. There would be no accusations, no pleas, no long, tear-stained explanations. He didn't deserve her pain. She wrote only 3 short sentences. Nathaniel, you once told me you could never live in a world without trust. I see now that you were only ever talking about your own. I am going to find a world where my daughter can breathe truth. She didn't sign it with love. She didn't sign it at all. She walked into their master bedroom. The king-sized bed, with its 1,000 thread-count sheets, looked vast and empty. She placed the folded letter squarely in the center of his pillow. It was a stark, white surrender flag in a war he hadn't even known she was fighting. With a final look around the penthouse that was no longer her home, Ava Sterling walked to the service elevator, her small suitcase in hand. She rode it down to the ground floor, emerging not into the grand doorman-attended lobby, but into a quiet back alley. She slipped into the pre-dawn darkness of the city, melting into the shadows like a phantom leaving behind a life that had been nothing more than a beautiful gilded lie. Hours later, Nathaniel returned. He was still fuming, replaying the disastrous scene at the restaurant. Bianca had been furious, accusing him of being sloppy. He'd spent the last few hours placating her with promises of a trip to Paris and a new diamond necklace. He entered the penthouse, expecting a confrontation, ready to unleash a torrent of blame and gaslighting on Ava for her hysterical behavior. But the apartment was silent. "Ava," he called out, a thread of irritation in his voice. "We need to talk." Silence. He strode into their bedroom, his speech already prepared. But he stopped dead in the doorway. The bed was empty, perfectly made. And on his pillow, that solitary white envelope waited. He picked it up, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He read the 3 sentences. He read them again. The words were calm, devoid of the emotion he had expected. It was their very coldness that chilled him to the bone. This wasn't the writing of a distraught wife who would be crying at her mother's house. This was something else, something final. He checked the closets. Her clothes were all there. Her jewelry box was untouched, but her passport was gone from the safe, and the small suitcase she'd had since before they were married was missing. A frantic search of the apartment revealed nothing else out of place. It was as if she had simply evaporated. He stood in the middle of the living room as the sun began to rise, bathing the penthouse in a pale, ethereal light. The letter was still clutched in his hand. Annoyance was slowly giving way to a strange, unfamiliar feeling. It wasn't guilt. Not yet. It was dread. The chilling realization that he had underestimated the quiet, gentle woman he called his wife. He had broken her heart, and in response she had simply vanished. For the first 48 hours, Nathaniel's primary emotion was a simmering, arrogant rage. Ava's disappearance was in his mind, a childish, theatrical stunt designed to punish him. He imagined her holed up at Jessica's apartment, weeping and expecting him to come crawling with apologies and a ridiculously expensive piece of jewelry. He resolved to let her stew, let her realize how foolish she was being. He needed to control the narrative, and the first step was to project an aura of calm indifference. He went to the office, chaired his meetings with his usual sharp authority, and even joked with his senior partners. When his secretary asked if Mrs. Sterling was feeling well, as she hadn't called to confirm their dinner reservations. Nathaniel waved a dismissive hand. "She's decided to visit her sister in Oregon for a few days. A last-minute trip before the baby comes. You know how she is." The lie came easily, but it felt thin even to him. Ava hadn't spoken to her sister in over a year after a petty argument. It was a clumsy patch on a rapidly fraying reality. At night, the penthouse's silence grew louder, more accusatory. He'd walk past the nursery, and the lavender and cream perfection of the room felt like a judgment. He'd see her favorite mug by the coffee machine and feel a strange pang of something. It wasn't loss, not yet. It was disruption. His well-ordered life had been disrupted. He called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail after a single ring. It was turned off. He sent a series of texts, each one escalating in tone. "Ava, this little game is absurd. Come home. I know you're with Jessica. Tell her to stop feeding you this feminist nonsense. We are married and we will solve this." "Fine. Have it your way. But you're being incredibly selfish. Think about the baby." No response. On the 3rd day, a crack appeared in his composure. One of the city's most voracious gossip columnists, a woman named Diana Vane called his office. "Nathaniel, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I heard a rather distressing rumor that Ava was seen leaving Vivre in tears the other night, and no one has seen her since. Is everything all right in paradise?" Nathaniel's blood ran cold. "Diana, you know how rumors are. Ava is perfectly fine. She's on a short trip." "Oh, how lovely. And I suppose the other rumor that you were dining with the exquisite Bianca Dubois at the time is also just a silly misunderstanding." He ended the call, his hand trembling slightly. The story broke the next morning, a small but venomous piece tucked into the society pages. Trouble for the Sterlings. Millionaire magnate Nathaniel Sterling was spotted getting cozy with model Bianca Dubois on his anniversary, while his 7 months pregnant wife, Ava, has reportedly gone on a trip. Sources say Mrs. Sterling has been incommunicado for days. Has the fairy tale soured? The article was like a lit match tossed into a room full of gasoline. The calls started immediately. His mother, a formidable matriarch concerned only with the family's public image, was apoplectic. "Nathaniel, what is the meaning of this, a missing pregnant wife, a model? Have you lost your mind? Find your wife and fix this before it tarnishes the Sterling name." His business partners were more subdued but equally concerned. The merger was in its final delicate stages. The optics of the CEO being embroiled in a sordid domestic scandal were catastrophic. "This needs to go away, Nate," his senior partner warned, his voice grim. "Clean it up." Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through Nathaniel's arrogance. This was no longer a marital spat. It was a crisis. He drove to Jessica Thorne's law firm, storming past her receptionist and barging into her office. Jessica was sitting behind her desk, looking coolly composed. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice raw. "I assume you're referring to your wife?" Jessica replied, her tone glacial. "She didn't invite him to sit. The one you publicly humiliated. This is between me and Ava. You have no right to hide her from me." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Let me be very clear, Nathaniel. I haven't seen or spoken to Ava since before your anniversary. But if I did know where she was, I wouldn't tell you. A man who can't be trusted with his wife's heart certainly can't be trusted with her location. Now get out of my office before I have you removed for trespassing." Her denial was so absolute, so convincing, that it genuinely terrified him. If Ava wasn't with Jessica, then where on earth was she? The situation spiraled. The media frenzy grew. News vans were now parked outside his office building and their penthouse. The story had evolved the vanishing of Ava Sterling. His face alongside a glowing photo of a pregnant Ava and a sultry shot of Bianca was plastered everywhere. Bianca, far from being a comfort, became a nightmare. She called him incessantly, her voice a shrill mix of panic and accusation. "My agent just dropped me. They said the scandalous home wrecker image isn't good for my brand. You told me she was nobody, Nate. You told me you had it under control. I'm handling it." He snapped back, his patience worn to a thread. "Handling it. The whole world thinks I'm a monster who drove a poor pregnant woman to run away. You need to fix this. Hold a press conference. Tell them we're in love and she was unstable." Her self-absorbed narcissism was suddenly repellent. The glamour and excitement she represented had curdled into something cheap and desperate. He saw her for what she was, another acquisition, and one that was rapidly losing its value. A week after Ava left, Nathaniel sat alone in the dark penthouse, the city lights twinkling indifferently outside. His empire was shaking, his reputation was in tatters, and his mistress was a liability. The silence of the apartment was no longer just empty, it was mocking him. He finally looked at the letter again, the 3 short sentences that had started it all. I am going to find a world where my daughter can breathe truth. He had dismissed it as melodrama. Now it sounded like a declaration of war. He had not just lost a wife, he had created an enemy. And for the first time in his gilded, privileged life, Nathaniel Sterling was truly deeply afraid. He was out of his depth. His usual tools of power, money, and intimidation were useless. He needed to find her not just to save his company, but because a terrifying void had opened up in his life where she used to be. He had to find her, and for that he needed someone who could operate in the shadows he had so carelessly created. With his world crumbling, and the police now asking pointed questions about domestic disturbances, a line of inquiry that made his blood run cold, Nathaniel knew he needed an expert. He didn't need a bulldog lawyer or a slick PR agent. He needed a ghost. He needed someone who could navigate the unseen world of secrets and disappearances, someone who operated with discretion and ruthless efficiency. His search led him to a name spoken only in hushed tones in the city's most powerful circles, Mr. Peterson. He wasn't a private investigator in the traditional sense. He was a problem solver, a former intelligence agent who now offered his considerable skills to the highest bidder. His office was a small, unassuming suite in a historic but unremarkable building, a deliberate choice to project anonymity over opulence. Mr. Peterson was a man in his late 50s with graying hair, impeccably tailored, but simple suits, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He listened to Nathaniel's frantic, self-serving version of events without interruption, his hands steepled on the uncluttered surface of his desk. When Nathaniel finished, Peterson was silent for a long moment. You have lied to the police, the media, and your business partners. Peterson stated, his voice calm and even. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. You will now tell me the truth. Every detail. My work is impossible when built on a foundation of deceit. Stripped of his usual power, Nathaniel found himself confessing everything: the affair with Bianca, the confrontation at the restaurant, his cruel words, the coldness of Ava's letter. He painted a picture of Ava as gentle, unassuming, and emotionally fragile. She couldn't have done this on her own, Nathaniel insisted. She's not capable. Someone must be helping her, manipulating her. Peterson's expression remained unreadable. Assumptions are the enemy of discovery, Mr. Sterling. You have assumed your wife is weak. Let us operate on the evidence instead. Peterson's investigation began not with a search for Ava, but with a forensic deconstruction of her life. He wasn't looking for a damsel in distress. He was looking for a strategist. He accessed financial records, phone logs, and email accounts that Nathaniel didn't even know Ava had. Slowly, a portrait of a completely different woman began to emerge. Your wife was not idle, Mr. Sterling, Peterson reported a week later, sliding a thin file across his desk. For the past 6 months, she has been methodically moving small sums of money from your joint accounts amounts, small enough to go unnoticed by you, into a private trust. The total is just over $200,000. Nathaniel stared dumbfounded. That's impossible. She never handled the finances. She also liquidated a small portfolio of stocks she inherited from her grandmother 3 weeks before she disappeared. Peterson continued, his voice impassive. And she made a single significant withdrawal from that private account the morning she vanished. $50,000 in cash. The image of a weeping, hysterical woman was evaporating, replaced by that of a calculating planner. The disappearance was not a spontaneous act of heartbreak. It was a premeditated escape. Peterson's inquiries delved deeper, uncovering layers of Nathaniel's own life he preferred to keep hidden. The investigator found evidence of other indiscretions, a pattern of behavior with women that bordered on predatory. More alarmingly, he flagged several of Nathaniel's recent business dealings. "This merger you're so concerned about," Peterson said, his gaze sharp. "The one with Omnicorp. My sources tell me there are irregularities, whispers of shell corporations' inflated asset valuations, things the SEC would find very interesting." "Those are baseless rumors." Nathaniel snapped, a fresh wave of panic rising in his throat. "Perhaps," Peterson conceded, "but what is interesting is your wife's search history on her personal laptop, which you overlooked in your study. In the weeks leading up to her departure, she wasn't just searching for nursery furniture. She was searching for forensic accounting, whistleblower protection, and the names of several prominent white-collar crime attorneys, including notably Jessica Thorne, who specializes in that very field." The room seemed to shrink around Nathaniel. He felt a profound, sickening chill. Ava's departure wasn't just about the affair. That was merely the catalyst. She had been digging. She had found something far more dangerous to him than a jilted lover. The affair didn't just break her heart. It confirmed that the man she was married to was rotten to the core, and it gave her the final push she needed to act. She wouldn't, Nathaniel stammered the words hollow. "She wouldn't understand any of that." "Again, Mr. Sterling, you underestimate her," Peterson said coolly. "Your wife has a master's degree in art history, with a focus on provenance. Her entire academic career was about tracing the history of objects, uncovering forgeries, and following a paper trail. You seem to have mistaken a quiet nature for a simple mind." The investigator's final discovery was the most direct. He had traced a single phone call Ava made on a disposable burner phone she had purchased the day she disappeared. The call lasted 15 minutes and pinged a cell tower in a remote rural part of Wisconsin, but the number she called was not for a friend or family member. It was the front desk of a small private airfield. "She chartered a flight," Peterson concluded, closing the file. "A single-engine plane paid for in cash. No flight plan was filed with the FAA, which is legal for this type of aircraft. The pilot is a discreet professional who specializes in off-the-grid transportation for wealthy clients seeking privacy. He dropped her off at a similar private airstrip outside of Aspen, Colorado. From there, the trail goes cold." Aspen, a playground for the rich, but also a gateway to vast, isolated mountain communities where a person could easily disappear if they had the resources and the will. Nathaniel slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. Every move he made had been anticipated. Every assumption he held had been wrong. He had been playing checkers, while Ava was playing a masterful game of chess. Her letter suddenly made terrifying sense. She wasn't just leaving him. She was running from him, protecting her child from a man she now saw as a criminal. And she had taken something with her knowledge. Knowledge that could not only end their marriage, but could also send him to prison. The search for his missing wife had become a desperate race to find a woman who held the power to destroy him completely. And she was, by all accounts, 2 steps ahead. The air in the small mountain town of Havenwood, Colorado, was thin, crisp, and clean. It smelled of pine and damp earth, a scent so fundamentally different from the exhaust-choked air of Chicago that it felt like it belonged to another planet. For the woman now known as Amelia Grace, it was the smell of freedom. Ava, or Amelia as she now called herself, had found Havenwood through a network Jessica had meticulously arranged. It was a town nestled deep in the Rockies, a place for people who didn't want to be found. Here she wasn't the vanished wife of a millionaire. She was a quiet, pregnant widow who had moved west to escape painful memories and start anew. The townspeople, rugged and self-reliant, respected privacy. They offered quiet smiles and nods, but asked no prying questions. Her new home was a small rustic cabin set on a few acres of land, with a stream gurgling nearby, and a breathtaking view of the snow-capped peaks. It was a world away from the sterile, glass-walled penthouse. Here the floors were made of warm, knotted wood, the furniture was comfortable and worn, and the silence was peaceful, not oppressive. The first few weeks were a blur of settling in and decompressing from the trauma of her escape. There were nights she woke up screaming the image of Nathaniel's furious face, and Bianca's mocking smirk burned into her memory. But with each sunrise that painted the mountains in hues of pink and gold, the ghosts of her past life began to fade. She had not done this alone. Jessica Thorne had been her silent partner, her lifeline. Weeks before the confrontation, when Ava's suspicions about Nathaniel's business dealings had solidified into terrifying certainty, she had reached out to her old friend. "I think he's a criminal, Jess." Ava had confessed, her voice trembling over a secure, encrypted line. "And I think I'm in danger. Not physically, but my whole life is built on a lie. If I confront him, he'll crush me." Jessica, ever the strategist, had immediately switched into action mode. "Then we don't confront. We escape. We gather evidence, we create a new identity, and we build you a fortress. When the time is right, you won't be confronting him. You'll be dismantling him." Together they had planned every detail. Jessica had arranged the burner phones, the private charter, the purchase of the cabin through a blind trust, and the creation of Ava's new identity. Ava's role had been to play the part of the unsuspecting wife while quietly downloading damning files from Nathaniel's home server files, detailing offshore accounts, fraudulent invoices and communications that clearly outlined his intent to defraud his new business partners. She had copied them onto a small encrypted hard drive that was now stored in a safety deposit box in a bank in a neighboring town. Now, in the safety of Havenwood, Ava focused on the one thing that truly mattered: her baby. She spent her days walking along the mountain trails, breathing in the clean air and talking to the little life growing inside her. She read poetry aloud, her voice soft in the quiet of the woods. She rediscovered her love for art, not as a curator of other people's work, but as a creator. She bought a set of watercolors and began to paint the stunning landscapes around her, the vibrant colors a balm to her bruised soul. 2 months after her arrival, she went into labor. Her midwife, a calm, sturdy woman named Mary, was by her side. There was no cold, sterile hospital room, no panicked husband in the waiting room. The birth took place in her cabin, in front of a crackling fire, as a gentle snow began to fall outside. After hours of intense labor, she held her daughter in her arms. The baby was perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the mountains. Ava wept, but this time her tears were not of sorrow, but of overwhelming, fierce, and unconditional love. She named her Hope, not Lily. Lily was the name chosen by a woman living in a cage. Hope was the name chosen by a woman who had broken free. "Hello, Hope," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she kissed her daughter's forehead. "It's you and me. We're going to be okay." Motherhood consumed her, healed her. Caring for Hope gave her a profound sense of purpose that her life with Nathaniel had always lacked. She was no longer just Ava Sterling, the wife. She was Amelia Grace Hope's mother. It was a title that felt more real and more valuable than any other. She kept in touch with Jessica weekly through encrypted emails. Jessica updated her on the firestorm she had left behind. Nathaniel's public image was in ruins. The Omnicorp merger had stalled the partners, now deeply spooked by the scandal and the whispers of financial impropriety. Peterson. Jessica learned through her own network was digging, getting closer. "He's hired the best," Jessica wrote. "They will find you eventually. Nathaniel is cornered and desperate. We need to decide when to make our move." One crisp autumn afternoon, as Ava sat on her porch, rocking a sleeping Hope, she looked out at the majestic, unyielding mountains. They had stood for millennia, silent witnesses to storms and seasons, their strength absolute. She felt a kinship with them. She was no longer the fragile woman who had fled in the night. She had weathered her own storm. She had given birth to a new life, and in doing so had reborn herself. She was strong. She was ready. She opened her laptop and sent a short, decisive email to Jessica. "It's time. Let's burn it all down." The Sterling Industries annual shareholder meeting was being held in the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel, a historic bastion of old Chicago wealth. The atmosphere was thick with tension. For months, the company had been hemorrhaging value. The failed Omnicorp merger, coupled with the ongoing scandal of the CEO's missing wife and swirling rumors of an impending SEC investigation, had created a perfect storm of investor panic. Nathaniel Sterling stood at the podium, his face pale and drawn a phantom of the confident titan he had been less than a year ago. He was fighting for his corporate life. He delivered a desperate, impassioned speech filled with jargon about restructuring, future-proofing, and synergistic alignment. He was trying to project strength to reassure the grim-faced men and women in the audience that their investments were safe, that he was still in control. But his voice lacked its former authority. His charm felt rehearsed and hollow. The room was not buying it. "And so," he concluded, his voice straining, "I ask for your continued faith in my leadership as we navigate these temporary headwinds and steer this great company toward a prosperous future." A tense, unconvinced silence followed. The chairman of the board, a stern man named Arthur Vance, was about to open the floor to questions. Questions Nathaniel knew would be brutal when the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Every head turned. A ripple of gasps and whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Framed in the doorway stood two women. The first was Jessica Thorne, her expression sharp and commanding. But it was the woman beside her who stunned the room into absolute silence. It was Ava. But it was not the Ava anyone remembered. The soft, gentle wife was gone. In her place stood a woman of breathtaking poise and power. She was dressed in a tailored, dark blue suit that was understated yet undeniably expensive. Her hair was styled in a sleek, professional cut. Her face, free of the haunted anxiety that had once clouded it, was calm and resolute. She radiated a confidence that was more potent than any of Nathaniel's blustering speeches. In her arms, she held a beautiful, bright-eyed baby girl. Nathaniel stared, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He felt as if he were seeing a ghost, a vengeful, impeccably dressed ghost. His mouth went dry. All the air seemed to have been sucked from the room. With a slow, deliberate pace, Ava and Jessica walked down the center aisle, the clicking of their heels the only sound in the cavernous ballroom. The shareholders parted before them as if they were royalty. Ava's eyes were locked on Nathaniel, her gaze level and unyielding. It was not a look of hatred or of pain. It was the cool, detached gaze of a victor observing her vanquished foe. They stopped directly in front of the podium. Ava adjusted the baby in her arms, her movements smooth and maternal. Arthur Vance, the chairman, was the first to find his voice, though it was strained with shock. "Ava, Mrs. Sterling. My God, is that you?" "It is Arthur," Ava replied, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone Nathaniel had just been using. It carried to every corner of the room. "Although I will be reclaiming my maiden name, Ashford, please call me Ms. Ashford." Nathaniel finally found his voice, a choked, desperate rasp. "Ava, where have you been? I've been worried sick. I hired people. I've been searching everywhere for you." Ava gave a small, humorless smile. "Yes, I know. Mr. Peterson is very good at his job. But I wasn't lost, Nathaniel. I was preparing." She turned her attention from her stunned husband to the board and the assembled shareholders. "I apologize for this interruption," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "But I am here today as the mother of Hope Ashford, who is through my marriage settlement and her paternal lineage a significant shareholder in this company, and I am here as a whistleblower." A collective gasp went through the room. The word whistleblower was like a death knell. Jessica Thorne stepped forward, opening a leather briefcase. "My client, Ms. Ashford, has irrefutable evidence that Mr. Sterling has for the past 2 years been engaged in a systematic scheme to defraud this company and its shareholders." She began distributing slim, neatly bound dossiers to the shocked board members. "In seat you will find documentation of illegal wire transfers to unaudited offshore accounts, falsified invoices used to inflate company earnings prior to the Omnicorp merger attempt, and internal communications proving Mr. Sterling's intent to embezzle funds. The total amount is in excess of $50 million. Panic erupted. Shouts of disbelief and anger filled the ballroom. Nathaniel was ashen, staggering back from the podium, as if he'd been physically struck. "Lies," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. This is revenge. She's a scorned woman trying to destroy me." Ava met his desperate gaze, her own expression unpitying. "Was I scorned, Nathaniel?" "Yes, but this isn't about revenge for a broken heart. It's about justice for your crimes. It's about protecting my daughter's legacy from the man who was willing to steal it." She shifted Hope in her arms, and for the first time her voice softened as she looked down at her child. "You built an empire on lies," she said, her eyes lifting back to his, now hard as diamonds. "And I'm here to ensure that my daughter's future is built on truth." Her entrance was not just a return, it was a coup d'etat. She hadn't come back to reclaim her place beside him. She had come back to take his. The room was in chaos, but Ava stood at its center, a pillar of calm, righteous power. The vanishing act was over. The reckoning had just begun. The evidence in the dossiers was a bombshell that obliterated Nathaniel's world in minutes. The ballroom erupted as board members saw undeniable proof of his crimes. His desperate claims of a scorned wife's revenge were useless against the cold, hard facts of his own emails and offshore accounts. Nathaniel, his face a mask of disbelief, lunged toward Ava. "You've destroyed everything!" he screamed, his voice raw with fury. Before he could reach her, security guards intercepted him, restraining the disgraced CEO as he thrashed and cursed. Ava looked at the shell of the man she had married, her heart holding only a calm, final resolve. "You destroyed it, Nathaniel," she said, her voice cutting through his rage. "I just turned on the lights." With that, she turned her back on him and walked out of the ballroom with her daughter and her lawyer, leaving the chaos behind. Her departure was followed by the swift arrival of federal agents. Nathaniel was arrested on the spot, his downfall as public and humiliating as he had always feared. The fallout was absolute. Convicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, Nathaniel was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, stripped of his assets and his power. The Sterling board, in an effort to save the company, appointed Ava, now Ms. Ashford, to an advisory role, relying on her integrity to restore faith in the business. 1 year later, Ava stood in her bright, sunny apartment overlooking a park. Her paintings filled the walls with color, and her daughter Hope took her first happy steps across the wooden floor. She was not a wife who had vanished, but a woman who had found herself. She had escaped the gilded cage, and in doing so had built a true home, a life founded not on wealth, but on the unshakable ground of truth and love. What an incredible journey of strength and resilience. Ava's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often ignite the fiercest transformations. She turned her pain not into despair, but into a meticulously planned quest for justice, proving that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about integrity, courage, and an unbreakable love for her child. She didn't just escape a toxic marriage. She dismantled an empire of lies to build a future based on truth. If her story of triumph moved you, please take a moment to show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it, and share this video with someone who loves a story of ultimate karma and empowerment. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next gripping tale. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.